forced to a rickety kitchen table to avoid disgracing my golden brother. His highborn Phil gasped. She's a legal genius I've referenced these past 3 years. My name's Eleanor Vance. I'm 41, and I've learned that the worst humiliations aren't always loud. Sometimes, the cruelest insults come subtly, delivered with a twisted grin by the very people who are supposed to be your blood. My younger brother, Julian, proved this to me 3 nights before a lavish family dinner, a celebration of his promising future. I was sitting at my large mahogany desk, the city of Chicago buzzing below my window, when his message pinged on my phone. At first, it seemed harmless. Just another last-minute tweak, another insignificant order from a family that had spent my entire life trying to edit me, to make me fit better for their friends. But then I opened it, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Julian wrote, "Hey, Elle, just a quick heads up about Friday. Victoria's family is going to be there, and her dad is a federal judge. He's very old school, very traditional, and very influential. Given the elite circles they run in, it would be pretty awkward and honestly embarrassing if you started talking about your background or trying to compare careers. It's best if you don't mention you're my sister to his colleagues just to keep things simple and avoid any weirdness. If anyone asks, just say you do some admin work at the courthouse. I've already talked to Mom and Dad, and they agree. See you at 7 o'clock. I sat there, the screen's blue light illuminating my face in the darkened room. Barely a few minutes later, my mother called. She wanted to smooth things over, using that careful, sensitive, aggressively rational voice she always used when she wanted me to swallow something awful without making anyone else uncomfortable. "Eleanor, darling," she whispered, "Julian told me he sent you a text. Now, please don't get defensive or emotional. You know how much pressure your brother is under right now. This is his big moment. Victoria's family is very particular. We just want the evening to go smoothly." And then came the kicker. "We've arranged a special little table for you in the back, right near the service doors. It'll be quiet, and you won't have to worry about making small talk with all those intimidating legal minds. Just come, eat, and keep to yourself. Just for one evening, Eleanor, just to keep things comfortable." Comfortable for whom? She stayed silent. She didn't need to explain. My family was defined by this. They never had to raise their voices to make their brutal meaning absolutely clear. Julian was the spotlight. He was to be proudly introduced. I was to be controlled, hidden, shrouded. Despite the bile rising in my throat, I told her I would come. I said I'd arrive on time, sit where they wanted me, and say nothing they didn't approve of. They were so utterly self-absorbed they never considered that the powerful, scary man they were so desperate to impress might already know exactly who I was the moment he saw my face. You have to understand the full setup before I tell you what happened when he stopped at my tiny table in the rear and the entire room went silent. You have to feel what it's like when your own family welcomes you by pretending you don't belong. I didn't answer Julian's text right away. I placed my phone face down on my desk's polished wood and just stared at the black reflection. Some insults are so perfectly packaged, they feel unreal, practiced, hauntingly familiar. This message wasn't random. It was the result of 41 years of being treated like the ugly, jagged piece of the family puzzle that never fit the pristine picture they wanted to present to the public. Julian, at 37, was always remembered. Charming without effort, loud in all the right ways, raised with the kind of pure, unflinching confidence that only comes from knowing the room will automatically bend around your demands. My parents centered their lives on him. They poured hundreds of thousands into his upbringing, private prep schools, elite lacrosse, pricey debate camps, $300 an hour college admissions coaches, the whole expensive, invisible superstructure that makes success look natural. After a huge donation, he was accepted into a top Ivy League university. They talked about it like our family name had entered history. When he landed a slick, high-paying job at a Chicago corporate legal firm, they repeated his title at dinner parties like he'd argued and won a Supreme Court case. I took a very different path. No one in my family ever cared enough to memorize my road. Julian's undergraduate education alone cost $280,000. I started at a nearby community college because that's all I could afford. I worked nights at a 24-hour diner, smelling of grease and bad coffee, just to pay for my textbooks. An academic scholarship got me to a public university. Law school was equally difficult, with zero safety net. There was no applause from my folks, no proud calls. Just exhaustion, unrelenting discipline, and the somber, heavy realization that I would have to build a genuine existence with my own two hands, brick by painful brick. And I did. I became an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago. For nearly a decade, I prosecuted large, sophisticated corporate fraud and governmental corruption cases, making powerful, wealthy men sweat through their costly clothes. After years of hard effort, I clerked for Justice Clara Sterling, one of the appellate court's smartest and most terrifying minds. In 10 minutes, her impossible standards could crush a grown man's ego. She was the first person in my life to see what I could carry, not what I lacked. Justice Sterling became more than a mentor. She became the closest thing I had to a mother who chose me unconditionally. Clara stood by me when I became a federal judge. My parents? They skipped the swearing-in, saying Julian had planned a weekend trip to Napa Valley and they couldn't reschedule the flights. I expected Clara to be annoyed when I told her about Julian's text and the dinner. I expected her to tell me to skip the event entirely. Instead, I was met with complete silence. She stopped stirring her drink, gazed out the window, and wore a very quiet, very deadly expression I had grown to respect. Eleanor, what is the name of your brother's fiancée? Victoria, I said. Victoria Montgomery. Clara narrowed her eyes. And her father's name? Arthur, I replied. Arthur Montgomery. The moment I spoke the name, Clara's countenance changed. She sat back in her hefty leather chair, steepled her fingers, and exhaled a tiny, sharp breath of disbelief. A slow, hungry smile crossed her lips. So, Clara whispered, that's the man they're so desperately trying to impress. I frowned, bewildered. Do you know him, Clara? She stared at me calculatingly over her teacup. Eleanor, Arthur Montgomery is the Chief Justice of the neighboring circuit. And more importantly, that man has cited your written opinions on corporate malfeasance more than once in his own public remarks. He uses your rulings to teach his clerks. He knows exactly who you are. That changed everything for Friday night. I wasn't suddenly craving murderous revenge, not yet. It was because I recognized, for the first time, that I wouldn't be entering that room alone, helpless and small. My brother had no idea that the sister he was most afraid to claim, the sister he wished to hide by the kitchen doors, was the one person in that sumptuous dinner party they would never be able to dismiss once the truth came out. By Friday evening, Chicago's air was dangerously cold, a biting breeze from Lake Michigan that made everything seem sharper. I had chosen two specific things. First, I wouldn't let my family see me upset or sad. Second, I would never help them tell their pitiful lie. Just after 6 p.m., Clara Sterling picked me up in her elegant black town car. No words were wasted on empty comfort. That was never her style. She stared at me once, taking in my fitted basic black dress, plain heels, and my armor-like chilling calm. Good, Clara replied, watching the city lights slip by through the window. Let them underestimate you in peace. It makes the awakening so much more violent. The Heritage Club on Michigan Avenue was exactly the kind of snobbish, old money club my brother would love. Dark mahogany, polished brass fittings, thick Persian rugs, and oil paintings of dead, wealthy men who had undoubtedly created their great reputations before anyone in the room was born. The private dining room they'd rented overlooked the city skyline, every table meticulously set to assert elegance without saying a word. Clara and I entered the warm, gently lit room, and I saw my family before they saw us. My parents were already mixing, smiling too much and laughing too loudly, trying too hard to fit in. Julian, my brother, was at the center of the room, his hand on Victoria's waist, looking smug and content, as if he was finally being seen by the right people. Victoria radiated elegance, poised, dressed in a beautiful silk gown, handling herself like a grown-up who never doubted her place in these rooms. The moment he saw me, Julian's cheerful hue faded to a terrified blush. He apologized to Victoria and crossed the room quickly, his strides long and urgent, but not rapid enough to appear scared. He snarled at me under his breath, still wearing a terrible, phony smile. "You're late," he murmured, despite my actually being 10 minutes early. "And who is this?" He glanced at Clara, his gaze showing genuine perplexity for a moment. He didn't recognize her face, but he recognized her undeniable importance when it entered a room. Before Julian could question me further, Victoria smoothly appeared alongside him. She had those polished, courteous manners some privileged youngsters learn before they can drive. She addressed me like a stranger she was told to be polite to. "You must be Eleanor. Julian has mentioned you." Julian quickly introduced me with astounding dishonesty. "Oh yes, this is Eleanor," Julian softly remarked mockingly. "She helps out with some administrative work down at the courthouse, pushes papers, that sort of thing." I just regarded him. I stood there, staring into his eyes for a beat longer than socially acceptable. I didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't correct him. That's when his shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. He misinterpreted my quiet as capitulation, assuming I was accepting my role in his arrogant, narrow worldview. My mom swooped in next. Her expensive perfume dominated as she kissed the empty air near my cheek and gripped my arm. "Eleanor, sweetie, we saved you a lovely little seat right in the back. It'll be so much quieter for you there, away from all the noise and the fuss." Quieter meant hidden. I followed her to my table. It was the room's smallest, a rickety two-top, embarrassingly close to the heavy service door. Every time the waitstaff came and went, their trays almost touched my shoulder. From my secluded position, I had a clear view of the main table in the front of the room. Julian sat with Victoria and her parents, beaming like he'd been practicing for this role his whole pitiful existence. Clara sat at a nearby table, close enough to see the carnage, but far enough away to let the hosts run the evening. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and let the room unveil itself. I watched the dynamics. Julian laughed too loudly at bad jokes. My father worked too hard to know wine vintages. My mother nervously scanned the wealthy guests' faces as if asking for silent approval. Victoria's mother was alluring yet cold. But Arthur Montgomery, her father, was different. Arthur said little. He monitored everything. His weighty, obvious authority was felt without saying anything. I immediately saw why Julian was so keen to impress him. Arthur Montgomery shaped the room's gravity. Sitting alone near the kitchen doors during the first round of speeches and toasts, I noticed something intriguing. My family worked hard to impress him, but he wasn't impressed. Arthur listened politely. He nodded appropriately. He smiled when socially expected. But his piercing eyes occasionally roamed the room as if he were secretly measuring something the other visitors had missed. Just before the main supper service, Arthur rose. He approached a server, politely took a silver tray of champagne flutes, and strolled around. He had a personable, cordial, old-fashioned habit. He loved to walk around the room and thank people table by table before dinner arrived. I observed him move from table to table, chatting, shaking hands, and smiling. Julian seemed practically quivering with enthusiasm at the main table, behaving as if this modest, courteous gesture from his future father-in-law had already become part of his grand family mythology he'd brag about for 20 years. Then Arthur turned to the rear of the room. He walked toward me. I doubt anyone at the main table even noticed the dark corner by the service doors at that moment. My family wanted me quiet, little, eliminated, and out of the way. But the moment Arthur reached my tiny table and glanced down to see my face in the dim lighting, his entire posture transformed. He stopped walking so suddenly that the silver tray tilted perilously in his hands, and one of the crystal champagne flutes clinked softly. He stared at me for a long, breathless moment. It wasn't a confused look. Not the courteous, straining effort of attempting to place a slightly familiar face. No, a look of startled recognition was evident. Arthur swiftly placed the hefty tray in my table's unoccupied corner. He straightened his stance instantly, as if professional instinct had taken over before his conscious brain could catch up. Finally, he spoke. And his voice was serious. It echoed throughout the dining room like a courtroom judge's booming declaration. My God, Judge Eleanor Vance, I had absolutely no idea you were in attendance tonight. The room stilled. It didn't just quiet down. It turned lifeless, suffocatingly motionless, like only expensive, skillful rooms can. Everybody in the room knew the power dynamic had just abruptly shifted. There was a heavy quiet. Julian looked first at the front, then at my parents, then Victoria. Professionally, I stood carefully from my chair. Chief Justice Arthur Montgomery seized my hand with both of his before I could speak. He offered me a deep, respectful, submissive greeting, one suited for valued colleagues, not distant, awkward dinner guests hiding near a kitchen door. It is truly an honor to see you again, Your Honor, Arthur exclaimed, astonished. I just finished reading your written opinion in the Kincaid corporate fraud matter twice this past week. I literally told 3 of my senior clerks that if they wanted to learn how to surgically dismantle a fraudulent financial argument without wasting a single syllable, they needed to start by studying your rulings. By then, every face in the room was staring at us. Julian appeared to have lost all his blood at the main table. His plastic smile had collapsed. Victoria's face was tougher to read. First came confusion, then disbelief, and then the first crack of something much uglier forming behind her eyes. My mother panicked and laughed shrilly. She ran too fast from the main table, as if she thought momentum and artificial cheer might influence the story. "Oh, Arthur, please," my mother shakily said. "Eleanor is just so modest. She never likes to talk about her little job. She hates being the center of attention. Don't you, sweetie?" Arthur scarcely glanced at her. My mother was ignored with a blink. He focused solely on me. Arthur asked, with a confused brow, "Judge Vance, why on earth didn't you tell me you would be here, and why in God's name are you seated back here by the service entrance?" He almost got my diplomatic response. I almost replied carefully. But then I caught Julian's horrified, begging eyes across the room, and I concluded there was no reason to save them from the blazing building they had built. Before I could decide how much awful truth to tell, Justice Clara Sterling rose up from her table. She walked the room with unhurried, lethal assurance that had others physically jump out of her path without even realizing it. "Arthur," Clara replied calmly, piercing the tension like a scalpel. "I had a feeling this evening might hold a few surprises for you." Arthur turned, saw her, and was shocked to the point of disbelief. "Clara." "Justice Sterling, you brought her." "Of course I brought her, Arthur," Clara said, laughing dryly. Though I must admit, I was incredibly curious to see exactly how long it would take before someone in this esteemed room realized that a sitting federal judge had been deliberately placed by the kitchen doors. No one spoke. No one breathed. My family had nowhere to hide. Arthur looked from Clara to me, then slowly to the main table. He looked at Julian, who was motionless alongside the woman he meant to marry into power. Arthur asked quietly, yet the calmness made it heartbreaking. "Julian," Arthur whispered, "why is Judge Eleanor Vance sitting back here?" Julian spoke, but said nothing useful. He swallowed loudly. He grimaced when he tried to smile. Well, sir, there was just some confusion with the seating chart. The venue made a mistake. And well, Eleanor doesn't really care where she sits. She's very low maintenance." The entire story was contained in that tiny, pitiful sentence. I heard the words of an arrogant boy who had spent his life judging what I deserved and expecting I would silently accept his trash. Arthur's eyes got dagger-like. Victoria looked at her fiancé like a stranger, removing a familiar mask beside Julian. I could almost feel the room's oxygen rearranging around the truth. Arthur's next action doomed Julian forever. He took the empty chair across from me at my tiny, shaky table and sat. He never rejoined the main table. He never returned to his daughter or future son-in-law. That one decision hit harder than a public slap. He was quiet. He didn't shout. He merely showed Chicago's elite which individual in that room deserved his regard. That awful moment taught my brother what it felt like to be left standing in the wrong position, vulnerable and small, while the world watched. No one moved in the dining room for a painful few seconds. The waiters, appearing to detect the nuclear tension, vanished via the side doors with the quiet efficiency only upscale restaurants have. Julian stood opposite the main table, one hand half lifted, as if he believed he could speak his way back into control with the proper words, quickly. He never did. Arthur placed one hand on my table, looked across the room at Julian, and spoke again. His steady voice made every sentence sound like a hammer blow. I asked a very simple question, Julian. Why is Judge Eleanor Vance seated back here? My mother, unable to let silence sit, always intervened first when the terrible reality got close to her precious boy. She laughed shrilly, vibrating with anxiety. Arthur, really? It was just a misunderstanding. Everything happened in such a rush with the planners, and no one meant anything by it. Eleanor is family. She understands. Clara limited her response to 2 sentences. Clara took her phone from her expensive bag and glanced at me, offering me the choice to stop her silently. I didn't blink. I was silent. Clara aimed the screen at Arthur. I think the seating was actually very intentional, Arthur, Clara murmured, her voice echoing in the quiet room. In fact, I have the exact instructions right here. Clara then read Julian's text out loud. She didn't summarize. The edges weren't softened. She read the words literally. Given the elite circles they run in, it would be pretty awkward and honestly embarrassing if you started talking about your background. It's best if you don't mention you're my sister to his colleagues. If anyone asks, just say you do some admin work at the courthouse. Silence was incomparably worse than shouting. It was a heavy, oppressive quiet that leaves no room for denial, because everyone in the room heard the same unpleasant truth at the same time. Victoria looked at Julian as if she wanted him to laugh, claim it was a hoax, or say it was a crazy mistake. Julian was too shocked and broken to perform. My father gazed down at the white tablecloth as if it had a miraculous escape hatch. My mother turned pale and unwell. Arthur was slow to respond, just extended his hand. Clara handed him the phone. He read the material slowly, scrutinizing the screen. Once more, he read it. When he looked up, his expression was chilly in a courtroom-like way, as if a switch inside him had flipped from social civility to utter judicial clarity. Arthur asked Julian. His voice was low. Is this message authentic? Julian gulped hard, and I could see his throat bob from across the room. Sir, it looks bad out of context. Out of context? Arthur said, hatred spilling from his mouth. Julian still sought that, in the face of devastation. No apology, no shame, just a frantic request for a better framing. Victoria made a harsh sound near him, not nearly a gasp or a laugh. It was more like disbelief turning into disgust. She twisted to face him. You told me she was a secretary. Victoria shook with anger. You told me she barely had any contact with your family because she was a drifter. You told me she didn't like formal events because she didn't know how to behave. Answering all 3 lies at once just tightened the noose around Julian's neck. He stuttered. The guy was sweating. He indicated he was keeping the night simple. He wanted to avoid awkwardness. He hoped introducing me as his sister would distract from supper. Arthur got up from my table. All eyes in the room watched him. No, Arthur roared in finality. What you feared was comparison. You didn't hide your sister to protect this evening, Julian. You hid her because you knew the truth about her accomplishments would make every single exaggerated story you have ever told about yourself feel incredibly small. No one disputed him. No one could. True accuracy hit the room like a heavy steel door closing. Victoria's look changed. Complete clarity had returned. There was humiliation, but also a burning anger. It was the anger that comes from realizing one was not just misled, but actively involved in someone else's pathological dishonesty. She narrowed her eyes at my brother. How many times have you done this? How many other things have you lied about? Julian took her hand. Tori, baby, it's not like that. I swear. Victoria yanked her hand back like he'd burned her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. That made his situation worse. No betrayal speech, just quiet, crushing finality. She looked down at her left hand. She gazed at the massive diamond engagement ring for a moment, as if it belonged to a past life. The ring slowly slipped off her finger. She placed it on the table beside her crystal water glass. The soft click of metal hitting glass was louder than anything else all night. Julian stared at the ring in confusion. He looked at her, and for the first time since Arthur recognized me, his face showed pure panic. Julian begged, "Victoria, please." His voice cracking. He whispered her name as if he believed he could handle this privately. Victoria didn't resist. She left him, grabbed her evening bag, and said the one thing men like my brother never expect to hear from the women they have spent months performing for. "You didn't just lie to me about your sister, Julian," Victoria said coldly. "You lied about the fundamental kind of man you are." Julian turned around and tried to face me. That was his instinct, even now. He wanted the magical fix from the person he had just tried to erase when his world collapsed. He crossed half the room and stopped a few feet from my chair, speaking in that strained, urgent, whispering voice used by people who want forgiveness before they deserve it. Julian begged, "Eleanor, please," his eyes wide with terror. "Can we just step outside and talk for a second, please?" He implied I owed him privacy. He said I had to help him clean up his massive, burning mess in public. I looked up at him from my tiny table by the kitchen doors. His sweaty forehead and desperate eyes revealed what I had missed for most of my life. He wasn't sorry because he realized his cruelty to me. Only because the room stopped rewarding him did he regret it. I kept my voice level and said, "No, Julian. You were perfectly comfortable humiliating me in front of a room full of strangers. You can hear my answer in front of them, too." It hit him harder than if I'd stood up and punched him in the jaw. He recoiled. Several people at the main table awkwardly looked away, suddenly obsessed with their water glasses, linen napkins, or the city lights outside the windows. Arthur approached his daughter. He looked authoritative, not angry, which is scarier. He told Victoria to put on her coat. He looked at Julian one last time. "The wedding is off," Arthur said emotionlessly. "There will be no further discussions about funding, planning, or family introductions. Do not contact my daughter again." The sentence was final and unnegotiable. My mother finally spoke, but it was thin, greedy, and desperate. She almost threw herself forward. "Arthur, please. Everyone is overreacting. Families say hurtful things sometimes. Julian made a mistake. He shouldn't lose his entire future over one silly little text message." Clara looked at my mother with the same contempt she showed unprepared, careless attorneys in court. "This was not one message, Helen," Clara snarled. "This was a lifetime habit that finally met witnesses. It seemed that one line eliminated the last defense." "Correct. Clara's text was only physical proof. The real crime lasted 40 years. My father once opened his mouth to speak to me, but the words died between his throat and the table. He had been silent for too long when it helped him. It was too late to turn cowardice into wisdom." Victoria returned with her coat over one arm. She didn't see Julian again. She passed him and stopped at my table. She looked down at me. Her face showed deep humiliation, but also stability and gratitude through the shock. "I am sorry, Judge Vance," Victoria whispered. "I should have asked better questions." I nodded slowly. "You know the truth now. That's what matters." She left with her parents shortly after. The heavy oak doors of the private dining room closed behind them, lowering the room's temperature. Dinner ended even though half the plates hadn't been served. All warmth and polish were gone from the conversations. After the audience stopped believing the script, a grand performance was a pitiful wreck. Julian attempted one last, pitiful attempt. He walked toward me, whispering, "Eleanor." His cracking voice. My name was said softer this time, like we were children again, like he could still pull rank through familiarity. Standing before he finished the sentence, I grabbed my clutch. "There is absolutely nothing left to discuss, Julian," I said, echoing through the silent room. "Not tonight. Not privately. Not ever again. I am done being useful only when I am willing to stay small." Clara rose beside me silently. I could feel every eye in the room following us as we left. Only, for the first time in my life, did that heavy attention not feel like judgment. I felt corrected. Chicago's cold air instantly cut through my last hint of heat. Clara spoke after we reached the curb and the town car arrived. "Are you okay, Eleanor?" she whispered. I paused. I glanced back through the Heritage Club's tall, glowing front windows. Julian was still standing where I left him, stranded in the burning ruins of the fake image he had spent his life selling. Turning to Clara with the freezing wind in my hair, I said the truth I had felt all night. I am now. The next morning's fallout was faster and worse than I expected. By Monday, the story was spreading like wildfire through the elite private legal circles my brother had spent his adult life trying to break into. I told no one. It wasn't necessary. Rooms like that are ruthless at executing humiliation, especially when it exposes a character flaw rather than just bad manners. An engagement breakup at a formal family dinner would have been juicy gossip. But a broken engagement after the groom arrogantly tried to hide his sister's position as a respected federal judge? That changed everything. A huge, blaring warning siren. In 1 week, Julian's carefully managed, pristine reputation began to crack in places he could never repair. A senior corporate law firm managing partner had known Arthur Montgomery for over 20 years through legal charities and elite bar events. Julian was called into a glass-walled conference room on Wednesday afternoon, unprepared. No one accused him of a crime. They did much worse in business. They doubted his judgment, his honesty, and the fabricated self he had been aggressively selling to their millionaire clients and senior colleagues. Men can survive disdain in cutthroat rooms. A man cannot survive being seen as small, vain, insecure, and untrustworthy. What would he lie to a client about if he lied about his own flesh and blood to look taller? Julian was immediately removed from a multi-million-dollar client development track. He lost the internal support he needed for his partner promotion. The firm quietly but firmly requested his resignation 3 weeks later. There was polite language in the severance package. People in those circles always do that to make the destruction look civilized. He knew the ending was brutal and unavoidable. The collapse continued to spiral. Without his upcoming wedding to a wealthy heiress, new family money, and the social lift he had been banking on, his lavish lifestyle began to violently collapse. Julian had leased a huge ultra-luxury West Loop penthouse apartment that he could no longer afford because he planned to marry Victoria and live a bigger, wealthier life. He'd hidden his massive debt under his designer clothes, steakhouse dinners, and networking smiles. The dominoes fell quickly after the high-paying job disappeared. The penthouse lease was broken first. The luxury BMW was repossessed. Then the fake image completely broke. By the end of that bitter winter, the arrogant man who had once thought I was too embarrassing to claim publicly was desperately calling people he hadn't respected in years, begging for introductions. He requested favors. He begged for any work. Most didn't answer his calls. My parents, being toxic, did what people like them always do when a lie becomes too expensive. They tried to completely rewrite history. They initially blew up my phone, begging me to talk to him about his depression. After I ignored them, they begged me not to be cruel. Then they tried to spin the whole disaster as a family misunderstanding that had somehow blown out of proportion. My mother actually had the audacity to send me a frantic 4-page email. I will never forget the sheer delusion of her words. She wrote, "Eleanor, family is about forgiveness and loyalty. You have always been the stronger one, the one who can take a hit. Julian is suffering. He lost his job. He lost Victoria. He lost his home. Siblings should never let outsiders come between them. You need to call Arthur and fix this. You need to tell them it was all a joke. Please stop being so selfish and think of the family." I read exactly half of that first paragraph before I permanently deleted it and blocked her email address. My father left 2 long voicemails that sounded more exhausted than actually sorry. He said the family was falling apart. He said Julian was under unbearable pressure and might have a breakdown. He said I had proved my point and should know when to be the bigger person and let things go. That was the exact moment I understood one final, liberating truth about my parents. They did not want justice. They did not want growth. They purely wanted access. They wanted the old version of me, the version who would silently absorb their injuries and insults so the rest of them could comfortably go back to living without any consequences. That version of me was dead. I changed my phone number. I strictly filtered my emails. I instructed my clerks and court security to immediately decline any personal deliveries or visitors that came to my chambers without prior review. I didn't do it out of blinding anger. I did it out of pure, crystal clarity. Discovering the huge difference between the two changed my life. He never reclaimed Victoria. A month after the disastrous dinner, she wrote me a short, handwritten note on heavy, cream-colored stationery. It was simple, elegant, and more honest than anything my blood relatives had sent me. She thanked me without insisting on being the center of the pain. She said, "Judge Vance, seeing how easily and callously a man could diminish his own sister, forced me to confront how often I have mistaken charm for actual character. What happened at that dinner may have embarrassed me for an evening, but marrying Julian would have destroyed me for a lifetime. Thank you for your silence and for your truth." I saved the note. True truth is rare, and I've learned to respect it wherever it appears. Victoria and I didn't become close friends, but I valued her honesty. As for me, I did as usual. I got back to work. As always, I read complex legal briefs, heard difficult arguments, wrote meticulous opinions, and built my life steadily, disciplined, and quietly. The only difference was that I no longer waited for my family to accept me. I underestimated how heavy that waiting was. Everything became very clean after hope disappeared. A coveted appellate circuit vacancy opened 11 months after the dinner. For the first time in my career, powerful people were promoting my name. Justice Sterling supported me without hesitation. Chief Justice Arthur Montgomery, to his credit, did something I never asked for or expected. My legal rigor, writing, and judicial temperament were publicly discussed professionally. He wasn't compensating for the dinner. It was because he believed I was the best lawyer for the job that mattered most to me. If anyone was surprised by my nomination, it was only those who had never met me. I admired the hard, honest work of congressional hearings, which were long and exhausting. When my official confirmation arrived, I didn't cry. As I looked out over the city from my office, I thought about that tiny, wobbly table by the service doors. I thought about how hard my brother had tried to hide me. I thought about how ironic it was that only he was erased from high society. My swearing-in ceremony was held in a massive, packed ceremonial courtroom with crisp winter light and people who actively chose me in meaningful ways. Justice Sterling smiled proudly. Chief Justice Montgomery attended. My former clerks, colleagues, staff, and those who had seen me at my best and worst were there. My parents were excluded. Nothing was told to my brother. Some consider that harsh. I call it correct. Shared blood does not prove family if it has only been used for leverage, silence, and shame. Respect proves family. Who tells the truth about you when lying is easier proves it. Whoever stands beside you without asking you to shrink to make them feel taller proves it. That brutal lesson cost my brother dearly, and the cost kept rising after that engagement dinner. His wealthy engagement, which he thought would elevate him, ended. He lost his prestigious career built on performance rather than substance. His luxury home was unsustainable without the future he arrogantly assumed was guaranteed. He lost the most expensive, devastating thing he could never get back. He lost the right to say his sister would answer the phone. If my experience taught me anything, it's that true loved ones will never need you to shrink to feel bigger. People who ask you to disappear for their own comfort are not protecting the family. They are revealing themselves. Some revenge is more devastating than humiliation. Not shouting matches, not actively seeking destruction. Standing still in the truth long enough for everyone in the room to see who is really valuable can be the greatest revenge. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had someone try to make you small just for their own ego? Tell me what you think. I really want to know.